Hello, organizers.
Hello, good afternoon, ma'am. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I just want to make a request that over my screen it is displayed Ananya Sharma because right now I have logged in through my niece's ID, right? Otherwise, I am Aparna Sharma. So just don't get confused over that.
Okay, thank
Right?
you.
just informing you
Yeah.
that I am one of the panelists of second session, Dr. Aparna Sharma.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, 15 minutes.
Rachel, any technical trouble? I hope not. You're starting on time. Rachel?
I'm not sure, ma'am.
What happened?
I will let you know. I'll just find out.
Okay. We're waiting.
Yeah.
Hello. There are no technical glitches, ma'am. We will start. We are only.
Okay. I was just wondering. Yeah. I know there won't be any technical. Yeah.
We will start.
Good afternoon to one and all. It gives me the greatest pleasure to be a part of and witness this amazing gathering of such intellectual people today. In the second panel of this symposium, we have speakers from the fields of history, economics, political science, and arts come together and bring forth their views on how their disciplinary can help the society to recover from the effects of this pandemic. I now take the privilege of introducing our first speaker, Dr. Aparna Sharma. She is currently designated as the Assistant Professor for History and English at Amity Institute of English Studies and Research, Amity University, Noida. With a teaching experience of 18 plus years, she has remarkable communication skills. Furthermore, she has many research papers and books published in her name. She holds a doctorate in history and has researched on impact of Sufi culture during medieval India and its relevance in present society. She is also a life member of Indian History Congress and Itihas Sanshodhan Historical Body, Gwalior. We are delighted to have you here, ma'am. Moving forward to our next speaker, we have with us our Honorable Dr. J. Matthew George. Professor J. Matthew George joined the St. Mary's College as principal in 2016. He began his career in the field of public policy and then moved to management, education, and training. An economist by training, he is an alumnus of the University of Hyderabad and Madras Christian College, and also of the International Visitor Leadership Program. He is very popular in giving speeches regarding leadership, communication, startups, public policy, and higher education. His areas of academic interest are spread over education, economics, and entrepreneurship. A warm welcome to you, sir. With us, we next have our second or third speaker, Mr. Akram Feroz. Mr. Akram Feroz, theatre director and human rights voice, is a theatre professional from Jagityal. Raised in Hyderabad, he is among the city's strongest proponents of global World Without Borders campaign. He is also a speaker at TEDx events across India and has traveled to various places of the country and all around the world. He carries with him about 40,000 kilometers of hitchhiking, 10,000 kilometers of cycling experiences, and numerous street plays on various social issues that he encountered during his journey. His street plays and theatre workshops have been very instrumental in good thoughts reaching people. I welcome Mr. Akram Feroz. We are glad you could join us today, sir. We also have Professor Kodan Ram with us today. He is an activist and a politician. He founded the political party Telangana Jana Samiti in March 2018. He was also the chairman of Telangana Joint Action Committee. He retired as professor of political science from Osmania University in Hyderabad. In the last 35 years, Professor Kodan Ram has founded and worked with many organizations that have laid the foundation for the creation of our state. Some notable organizations and events he was a part of includes Human Rights Forum, World Social Forum, and Telangana Vidyavantula Vedika. His contributions for the state are astounding. Thank you for sparing your valuable time for us, sir. I extend my gratitude once again to the panelists as well as the audience for being here with us today and all the others who have made this possible. I now hand over the charge to Dr. Maitri Shinde, ma'am, the moderator for our session. Thank you.
Ma'am, unmute.
Mike.
Maitri ma'am, you're on mute. Could you please unmute yourself?
She is done.
Welcome back, and I'm sorry, there's some technical issue here. So welcome back to the second panel of day one of the symposium, the national level symposium on the Corona crisis. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome all of you, especially the panelists and all the participants. Before we hand over the session to the panelists, I would like to give a brief on how we ended up or how we had the first panel. We had panelists from different disciplines like literature, psychology, law. Literature, of course, it gave insights and important inputs on the perspective of literary discourses, especially in terms of the apocalyptic literature, recalling different texts. Professor Vijay Kumar has given a wonderful talk on recalling the different texts, right from Chaucer to Amitav Ghosh. And intermittently, he also spoke about the different literatures across different languages. Then we had Professor Rangarao giving his inputs on law, from the discipline of law. He has given us crisp statistics and data relating to the theme. And then we close the session with Professor Madhavi Lata giving us inputs on from the discipline of psychology. In fact, she stressed more on the skill of resilience. That's the need of the hour. We've been talking about the physical health in terms of being fit and in terms of being able to stand strong, especially because of the pandemic. And now taking the cue further or the thread further, we have people from disciplines of history. We have Professor Aparna Sharma, we have Professor Matthew George, Professor Kodandaram, and of course Akram Feroz from the discipline of arts. So let us hand over the session to Professor Aparna Sharma, and I request you to take over, ma'am, from here.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Now
Yes, ma'am.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm really thankful to VNR, VJIET College and organizers and administrative body to give me this opportunity to speak up in a symposium which is quite relevant these days. They are just trying to bridge, to come up with a bridge connecting the past and the present and interrelating our learning from it, which is really needed this time. As I come from the background of history, I'm a student of history, so I just like to ponder over it that we need to understand why such pandemics, they came to us, why they are coming again and again repeatedly. Because if you see in some of the newspapers, it has been a news that after every 120 years or 100 years, something of such nature, it happens again and again. So that means somewhere or the other, we are not learning from our past. And that is why we are not taking the measures which have been required. Now, just coming up to my discussion and to my perspective, many times it has been said that history is a discipline which is related to dynasties, dates, kings, queens, and lot many other things. But actually, is it that history is? No, history is beyond this as well, right? It's not only about the dynasties. History was there. History was made when even no dynasties, they were over there. We study today the history of that time when neither the human beings, they were over there, when nor the cells, they were over there. Only nature was over there. So that means somewhere or the other, we have to learn from the very basal thing, which is nature. Nature and history, why I am relating out these two things, because somewhere or the other, this corona crisis, it has brought us back to the nature. And it is said that this is an alarming situation for us, and we should learn lessons from our past. Now, how we will be learning lessons from the past if we are not aware about the past? What we had done in the past, and how come it has come up with such sort of negative repercussions, that needs to be understood. Now, if we talk about, as I said, that it is something beyond dates, beyond dynasties, beyond rulers and all, they change that the things that nature is trying to teach us, we need to understand that. The nature is trying to teach us that there is a transit period in every society, in every nature, in every civilization, as it is there in the life cycle of human beings. Suddenly you will never find a person who is directly coming up with 17 or 18 years of age, right? So that means, first of all, a child is born and then he or she is proceeding as per the age, as per the time factor, and not only the physical body is getting some growth or some development, but mental capacity also, it is enlarged, right, in proportion to the age. So that means it's a very natural system of nature. Now, if we look into the past, what history is trying to teach us, that every civilization was having somewhere or the other connection with nature. In name of religion, every civilization, they used to have religion of their own. And why I'm taking religion, because these days this is the quite a burning question these days. So what actually the religion is, or what actually it was when the concept of religion, it came into concept. It was actually adjustment with nature, somehow paying our gratitude to nature. That was religion. That was the perspective of religion, right? So history is teaching us that many civilizations, I mean, if you see many civilizations, whether it is Russian, Egyptian, Greek, Indian, everywhere, somewhere or the other, the nature gods and goddesses, they are there and they were worshipped or they were praised. They were shown gratitude by that time contemporary civilization. So somewhere or the other, we have failed to pay back our gratitude to nature. That is why such type of things, they are taking place. Number one, this is one learning which the nature is giving us. I just like to give a very brief example. These days, we are having many floods at many places in India. Now, I guess because many of you belong to history discipline as well, or you can search over the net. Dholavira was one of the site of Indus Valley civilization, which was having floods in abundance. And they developed a very good mechanism to cope up with that flood and to stop the force of that water and to stop the destruction which is coming from that water, and they utilized that water for the future disposals, right? Now, this is how we need to learn. What we are not able to do today, they have done that in past. So that means we need to go back, we need to study their science, their technology, which we actually have forgotten. We think that we are, head to toe, in the technology, and we are actually taking many advantages from the present day system, and whatever is past, no scientific inventions was done in the past. Do you know, during the time of, if we talk about Indian context, during the time of Gupta Empire, which is, I'm not going back to Indus Valley civilization that much back, but yes, the Gupta Empire, it was having a mention of surgery. Can you imagine the transplantation of body parts? And not only this, but many ailments, they were cured by different medicinal practices which were there at that time. And not only this, but they have developed, not only getting some sort of medicines from nature, from plants and from other things, but they have developed the art of, or the science of, getting rid of various diseases by using a particular metal with a different proportion. Now, why I'm just taking this example, because we need to understand where we have felt that, or where we have lagged, in which type of understanding we have lagged, that we are not able to connect between, we are not able to have a connect or a bridge between our past and present. We need to understand that type of lacunas. Anyways, just more shifting to the another perspective which is there. Now, with the help of other disciplines, as ma'am also said, that, she mentioned that some sort of psychological perspectives, they have been discussed in the first session. Then from Chaucer to Ghosh, Amitav Ghosh, in literature also. Now, what role literature and history, they are actually, or rather all the courses or all the disciplines of humanities, they are interconnected somehow. Because we work on the cause and effect theory, and the time requires from us, this pandemic time, it requires to understand the cause and effect theory, which not only the history, but the science of our ancient times, it was telling us. It was constantly trying to tell us, if you'll do this, this will be coming up with such sort of environmental imbalance or ecological imbalance, and you have to face the repercussions. We are not at all pondering over that. Now, this is our mistake. So we need to learn over that thing as well. Then, yes, in terms of different ideologies and philosophies, yes, history is again coming up as a bridge between past and present. A famous historian, E.H. Carr, he has once said, his famous quote, all the historians must be knowing, that history is an unending dialogue between past and present. Yes, it is. And the reason is because it is constantly teaching us, or it is constantly telling us our mistakes that we have done in past, and our positive points, our positive steps that we have taken up in connection with nature, and which has benefited us. So all such things we need to take into consideration today. Now, just one brief example. It talks about philosophies, ideologies. Yes, this pandemic time period will definitely be going to make a major impact over the psychology of the people, which must have been done, must have been discussed in the earlier panel. But I just like to give it an angle of history. We need to understand again the psychologies throughout the years, throughout the ages. That means, okay, this happened in such and such era, then this impacted in such and such manner. And again, further, are we continuing with the same lineage, or are we making certain changes to it? Right? Whatever we have been done so far, what impact was it making on the mindset of the people, on the intellectual capacity of the people, and lot many other things. That means, as per the development of society also, we need to understand that history is a binding force. We can learn lot many things. Again, coming back to, because it is focused on the corona or the pandemic time period. See, there is a very normal thing whenever, we have been told and we have been born and brought up with this perception, please wash your hands before you eat anything. Now, when our parents, they were saying, to the younger generation of these days, they hardly follow any rules. So if we are advising them to do so, they won't be following that, maybe, right? But when science is coming up, when corona crisis comes up, that you need to wash your hands every time you are moving out, or every time you are touching something which is not supposed to be touched, which is not clean, which can have bacteria. Even if the surface appears clean to you, it may have some bacteria. Then we are registering to the fact. Now the need is that where we have left that lacuna, where we have come up with that gap, we need to fill that gap. In terms of, the next point of discussion is that what changes they are required in syllabi or in syllabus of history courses. We actually need to come up with some more practical versions. Many of you might be amused at that, how history can be taken up on a practical version. When I'm saying practical version, that means you just take few examples, few empirical studies as per the, say, for example, some natural resources of a particular region, or the psychological or physical development, or some ailments to a particular region people. Have a study of the contemporary society, and then study such type of things and such type of diseases of the past. Trying to understand the pattern, which pattern is followed. You'll find that somehow similar things, they are there. Today we are talking about quarantine and all. For years, we have been practicing. We hardly touch anyone who is having some fever in house, right? And what we say that, okay, once the fever is over, just wash all the clothes, wash the beddings, wash the clothes, and take a bath, and then you'll feel fresh. It's not only about feeling fresh. It's about removing the bacteria, right? And definitely removing that bacteria from your body and from some external things. It gives you freshness, not only of body, but it is going to make an impact on your psychology, your mind, your physical health as well. The whole purpose of this discussion, again and again, coming back to have a connect between past and present, is that somewhere or the other, we have forgotten our past. Whatever best practices, they were over there in past. We have not started researching from there, but we have taken up a new concept of research. We would have started very well. No doubt that new concepts, they are actually required, but we need to understand that. So our syllabus, our syllabi, they also need to be framed out in such a situation or in such a manner that the students, they will be getting a scope to understand the past, to take out the positive points from it, and then to experiment it with the present condition. whether it is authenticated or not, whether whatever has been written and passed, whether it is correct or not. Same can be applicable to different types of policies, administrative setups, and different policy makers. That means we are having a three-tier system: executive, judiciary, and this legislation. We need to understand that, are they doing their role in the same manner? Somewhere or the other, don't you feel like that everything that we have today was there in the past, was there in the ancient times, in the medieval times, until date? The only nature and the only change in their features, that is only there. So that means we have a very strong base. We need to work from that base. If we every time need to search for new and new bases, we are actually not jumping, we are not reaching to any conclusion. And if we say that, no, past is actually a futile exercise to learn about, then also it is not at all bringing us close to the cause and effect relationship. This is what I feel like, that the syllabuses, they need to be made with such a perspective where they should be student friendly, number one. And then students, they should not fearful of the dates and dynasties and the places of history, but they should enjoy it. Rather, they should be given these days we are having virtual classes. So the presentation, that means the live telecast. And when your voice, I mean, again, the psychology says that when you are listening to something and you are visualizing it, so your mind is having the capacity to retain it for a longer time period.
Sorry to intervene, Dr. Aparna Sharma. Could you wind it up in 2 minutes?
Okay. Just 2 minutes. So as ma'am said that I need to wind up, I just like to say that during this time, this is the time when we can actually ponder over certain things of past. What actually today we are doing, that will become history for tomorrow, right? For future coming generations and for our progenies, this will become history. So we should leave a legacy which should develop a type of psychology, a type of perception, that always we need to come up with a link between nature and the present, between the nature of past and the nature of today's world, right? Then only I guess that we will be able to come up with some sort of solution to the questions or to the problems that we are facing today. So with this, I take your leave. I rest my voice, and all over to you, ma'am. Shinde ma'am, all over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, ma'am. That was very insightful. Now I invite Professor Matthew George, Principal, St. Mary's College, to take over and give his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Maitri. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be part of this panel and to be part of this national symposium, the Corona Crisis, the Road Ahead for Human Societies and Nations. I'm choosing to spell crisis with an E, as I see this as fundamentally 3 crises. First, a health crisis. Secondly, an economic crisis. And thirdly, a socio-psychological crisis. I am primarily here representing economics, and the focus of this discussion would primarily be on the economic crisis. I would touch upon the other 2 only in the context of the economic aspect. I would like to begin by saying that we are commenting on or discussing something which is still evolving. Having said that, I think we can safely say that this pandemic is quite an infectious one, but relatively low fatality. Of course, for the individual affected or his or her family, such statistics is not of much comfort, as Professor Vijaykumar rightly pointed out in the morning. But at a larger level, and this is important for me because I'm primarily talking from the perspective of economics, policymakers will have to take an abstract view. From that perspective, the health crisis in the case of this virus becomes a significant challenge, mostly when the health systems in the city or region is overwhelmed because so many cases arise nearly at the same time and not primarily because of the lethality of the illness per se. Just to put things in perspective, in terms of lethality, even after including fatalities due to comorbidities, diabetes still beat coronavirus even in 2020. In India, our roads usually kill more people in a given year, although that has come down this year, I think, understandably so. That brings me to the main part, the economic crisis. The economic crisis due to corona has three different parts. Part one is due to the reallocation of resources from the productive side to the maintenance side. Human beings fall ill and move out of the production process. That's straightforward. Then there are resources diverted from production to maintenance and recalibration of facilities. There is time spent on washing hands and in sanitizing spaces. People are consuming unproven immunity boosters and medicines, but perhaps less of balanced food and education. So this is the first part, Reallocation of resources, however, happens all the time in an economy. But that is usually because capital and labor moves to sectors with higher returns. It is as if the society found or finds better use of the resources somewhere else. And so those are what we call as efficiency improving reallocation that happens over time. The reallocation that we are currently seeing is not of that kind. This is a reallocation of resources in the opposite direction. Resources are moving from where they are more productive to where they are less productive. For example, teachers are moving from classrooms to behind screens, just an example. Second part is about the consequences of our reaction to the health crisis. By our reaction, I mean both the governments and that of all of us. It is actually a continuum. At least some of you may have noticed that the three-tier government gave way to a four-tier one during this crisis. That is, there is the central government, then the state government, then the city or what we call as local self-government, and then the resident welfare association in many colonies and complexes. And each of these layers came up with as many rules and diktats as they could come up with. I'm a teacher, so pardon me when I cite extreme examples to illustrate a point. The top tier decided that this country will go into the most stringent lockdown in the world at 4 hours notice. And if you had gone that night to visit your aging grandmother in another district, it was illegal for you to return home, never mind whether you had little kids depend on you back home or not. But again, not an equal lockdown, as people traveling by air got 2 extra days. But if you are traveling by bus, you got just 4 hours. Then the other extreme, the bottom tier, the resident welfare associations, at least some of them, decided that all retail deliveries should stop, all maids should stop coming in, and that you should not step out except during the 2 or 3 hours they fixed. Although the in-between layer, the state government, was fine with you going grocery shopping for during the day within 3 kilometers. To cut a long story short, we essentially paralyzed the economy in such a way that today there is no way coronavirus can be entirely blamed for the current extent of the damage. So the first part of the economic crisis is the reallocation of human and capital resources from more productive to less productive avenues. The second part is about how we, the government, the society, all of us who are not in the lower ladders of the power structure, paralyze the economy based on our understanding of the situation or perhaps the lack of it. The second part mostly explains why different human societies and different nations have been impacted by the same virus very differently, especially with reference to the economy. Other things remaining the same, societies with decentralized and participatory governance and better social security seem to have done much better than the rest. And as you know, some of them globally are back to some sort of normalcy. The third part of the economic crisis arises from how we have remodeled our behavior and expectations due to the changes around us. Now, economics works on expectations. If we all expect inflation, inflation is likely. Similarly, the case with deflation. If all of us expect prices to fall and so postpone purchases, well, prices will fall. Those are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. So the third part is about how expectations and consequently behavior have been reshaped by the changes around us. I will just cite two examples. One, as you know, many companies have now got used to work from home culture. But what would that do to, say, commercial real estate? What happens to those providing paying guest accommodation or the curry points around them? Another example I can think of is, that when maids were stopped in many complexes, men started sharing household work in several families, which in my opinion is a big, big plus. But soon men and perhaps women decided to invest in labor time saving equipment. The sale of gadgets like dishwashers have shot through the roof in this phase. I'm guessing that one major part of the household work that men suddenly took up is dishwashing. LG's dishwasher sales went up by nearly 500% in April, May. Bosch had a 20,000 shortfall in supply even in the month of July. Larger refrigerators and microwaves have all seen over 200% growth in sales when other sectors have actually contracted. These durable goods are not going to go away anytime soon. So how does that impact our practices and lifestyle? What are the ripple effects?
LG would 500 times a minute. LG.
So the third part is really about
suppose
temporary phenomena. And such structural changes will have gainers and losers. Marginalizing further the marginalized have consequences for all. Now in economics, we keep harping on time scales referred to as short run or medium run or long run. And some of these changes could revert to the old equilibrium in some time and thereby just be short run changes. But many of them needn't be. For instance, I personally believe that about 10 years of digitization of the economy could happen in these 2 years. And those things are not going to go away anytime soon. Similarly, companies are going to find that they can attract better talent at lower cost by letting people be wherever they are without moving people closer to a common workplace. So a smart youngster in a small town may not be anymore at a disadvantage compared to a similar youngster in a metro city. So some of these are potentially inequality reducing changes. But there are massive inequality widening changes that have happened too. If you're on the wrong side of the digital divide, then you could be completely left out of the new normal. Of course, then you wouldn't be listening to what I'm saying. If you are in a job that is connected to the physical space, and unfortunately most low-income jobs are, then your demand is not necessarily going up, but could be coming down. We all saw a sudden surge of reverse migration among the lower strata of the society, but we could soon be in for a gradual phase of reverse migration by the middle segment too. And that changes a lot of things. For instance, a lot of urban land is being developed, anticipating exactly the opposite. That bubble may not burst too soon only because of the black money parked in that sector. But if the newer economy is going to be increasingly location neutral, then black money can only delay the inevitable. It cannot avoid it. And as an optimist, I would like to say that this may actually help clean up our politics. To recap, the economic crisis is essentially about 3 kinds of changes. 1, changes we didn't have a choice over, that is the reallocation of resources to less productive avenues. 2, changes we had a choice over, but the choices we made grounded us. 3, the changes to our own expectations and behavior. Let me come to the second last part of what I wanted to say. With specific reference to the Indian economy, it is a fact that we were in an economic crisis much before coronavirus came to India. The economy has been decelerating steadily since 2016. From about 8.5% growth then, we have steadily decelerated to 3.1% growth in the last quarter, which is pre-corona. But even that figure actually hides the grimmer reality because of excess propping up of the economy due to government spending. Our manufacturing sector entered the negative territory 3 quarters before coronavirus appeared on our shores. Constructed entered 2 quarters prior. And now, going by the predictions, we are heading towards anything between -5 and -10%. That is contraction in the economy, something happening for the first time since late 70s. For the first time in several decades, we may also have increased poverty rate. It might increase from 21.9% now, which is the lowest we've had, to perhaps above 30%, which is a reversal of the trend of the last few decades. Now, if that happened, that is not just a health or an economic crisis, that is a humanitarian crisis. About 8,000 crores of excess public provident fund withdrawals have happened in the last 4 months, while there is a 30% surge in gold loans. Debt formation is now not backed by asset formation. In other words, people are not borrowing anymore to invest, but to survive. Gross capital formation was as low as 28% in the quarter before Corona, from over 40% 10 years ago. And if not for one company, Reliance Jio, Indian rupee would have now seen unusual lows. Now, a fall in consumption and investment can be temporary, but the longer it lasts, the more structural impacts it would have. Just to give an example, a hotel manager without a job for 3 months is still a hotel manager. A hotel manager without a job for over a year may not remain a hotel manager. He will shift lines, or at least will try to. The same with, say, hairdressers, travel planners, housekeeping staff. You have even heard of teachers now selling vegetables. That brings me to the third crisis, the socio-psychological one. Now, the socio-psychological consequences are to do with the uncertainty and also with the unproductivity. It started off with an uncertainty about the health aspect, no doubt, but today it is substantially about the economic aspect. It is not that we are better off today on the health aspect than in March, far from it. Yet, the economic crisis has so dwarfed the health crisis that the anxiety is increasingly about jobs and incomes than about the illness per se. Now, some of you may disagree with me and cite anecdotal evidence of people worried about and affected by the illness more than about jobs, but that is actually an indication of the kind of inequality we have here. If an otherwise healthy person is today living in a bigger fear of the illness more than about his income and sustenance, then that is likely a luxury he or she can afford, as the person's income and occupation, they're perhaps secured. But anyway, this isn't about income alone. It is also about the need to be productive, to be usefully employed, to be good at what you are, to be respected. This socio-psychological crisis has long-term feedback effects on both health and economy. This could have significant impacts on future productivity and income earning capacity. As a society, we need to address the mental health aspect of this crisis, but I would not spend more time on that, not because it is not important, but because I'm expected to focus on the economy. And also Dr. Madhavi from Ashoka University already addressed aspects of this in the morning. Okay, so is it all doom and gloom? Not really. I am someone who believes that no crisis should be wasted. For all I can think of, this could be the point to which our next generation will turn back and look and say, well, if not for this virus, we would all have been doomed. Maybe we will realize that our cities shouldn't get any bigger artificially. Maybe we will realize that our stock markets are primarily speculative and have long come unhinged from the fundamentals of the economy. Maybe we will realize that discrimination is eventually bad for all. Maybe our eyes will be open to the fact that many of our education institutions have long degraded to being mere placement agencies. Maybe realization will dawn on us that newspapers and news media that are cheap or free for us are run for the advertisers, and in reality, we are being sold to them. Dr. Aparna reminded us about learning from the past. So I hope we may even realize that there are no messiahs in politics, and that it is institutional checks and balances and not the inherent goodness of any individual or party that will improve governance. Maybe we will also realize that low direct taxes and low government spending on social security and welfare are actually part of the problem and not of the solution. And now that I'm daydreaming, let me go the full mile and say that maybe we will realize that the economy will flourish when all people have rights, and when those rights, including the right to dissent, are sacrosanct, and that markets work best when truly independent players are transacting at free will. Just as the biggest economic impact of the crisis has been due to how we reacted to a smaller health crisis and changed our expectation and behavior, where we go from here will also depend on how we react to where we have got ourselves to. We have a choice. We can turn fatalistic, blame the virus, and decide that we cannot do anything about it and just wait out. Or we can decide that we have equal stakes in this country and its economy, and that we are willing to pay higher direct taxes, but we will demand accountability and governance, that we will bring experts back into the policy discourse, and that we will do what we can to improve our institutions and governance, to rebuild it from the trough, to rebuild into a more sustainable, fair, and participative economy. I am optimistic. I hope you are too. And I hope that our collective optimism turns out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, for that is how economies actually work. Thank you very, very much for patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. That was a brilliant take on the theme. I'm sure there would be a lot of discussions post presentations. I now invite Professor Kodandaram. Sir, are you there?
Good afternoon.
Yeah. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, when I received a call from VNR Vijnana Jyoti, I was a bit perplexed, because in my image, Vijnana Jyoti is an engineering college that offers courses in technology and engineering. And to my surprise, they decided to organize this important seminar. I immediately, decided to take part in this. At the outset, let me thank the organizers for inviting me. And I also congratulate them for organizing this seminar. Now, this seminar itself is an indication of how society is changing. Normally, on an occasion like this, we would all be together in a hall, exchanging views, talking to each other, sharing a lunch or a cup of tea. But today, we are in our own respective places and talking to each other over the internet, using the internet. So this itself is an indication how life is changing. And normally, these changes happen when there is a huge natural calamity, or when there is a very intense social conflict, or when there is some kind of a major economic crisis. Now, for the first time, a health crisis is turning itself into a social and economic crisis. Normally, it never happens. To the best of my knowledge, it never happened in the past. Maybe Ananya would be able to throw light on that. But then the most important thing is that today, we are in the midst of a crisis. Many of the things that we had believed, many institutions that we accepted, many values that we shared, they are now being challenged. And therefore, in the political realm, I would say that it is now time to think about certain important changes. So what is happening is that our social life itself has been completely disturbed. We are asked to live in isolation. And during the lockdown period, we were all in our own respective homes, locked down completely, unable to move out. But subsequently, after the lockdown was lifted, we started moving out. But for the fear of contacting virus, we decided and preferred to stay at home. And this kind of an isolation has a significant impact on our political life as well as on our economic life. Matthew has explained the implications for the economic life. I would not go into the details, but one thing I would like to state that the implications are not the same for every individual. The isolation does not mean the same thing for everyone. For some of us, it means that we are not able to meet our friends, share a lunch, or maybe, it prevents us from going to a movie. But for a large number of people, it means losing job. They're not able to go to work, and therefore people have lost their jobs. Large number of people in the unorganized sector, in the private institutions, they've all lost their jobs. And they're not able to, even people who are working from homes, like the artisans, they're not able to find a job. The petty traders, they're not able to sell their commodities. So they are in a very serious economic crisis. So for some of us, it is only a social crisis, but for a large number of people, it is social as well as an economic crisis. And for the first time, we have witnessed something like this. And people who have lost their job, they're pushed into poverty. Even the middle classes, having lost their job, they're not able to find any meaningful alternative income. Those with some fixed sources of cash income, we are all in a very safe position. Being a retired person, I get my pension, therefore I don't have to worry about my livelihood. But for many people, the livelihood, earning a decent livelihood is now a very difficult thing. And therefore, they're all worried. They're all worried about their future, and they're looking towards the government. They're seeking some assistance from the society. How best we can address these issues? Who will take up the responsibility? I think is the first major demand that everyone is raising. Now, this creates a lot of implications. One implication that we all must recognize that now we begin to see others as with certain amount of suspicion. They could be potential carriers. For us, everyone else is a potential carrier of coronavirus, unless and until they're known to you very intimately. So you suspect them. Some communities are even seen as the greatest, groups that spread the virus more than the others, the super spreaders as they call it, and therefore they are always hated. And this is something that is happening not only in India, but everywhere else in the world. People say that in America, the Chinese are viewed with suspicion. So this is something that we witness everywhere, this hatred towards the other human beings. So what's happening is that our collective life itself has been completely disturbed. Now this raises a lot of questions about the relationship between state and the individual, about the relationship between individual and the collective, and finally about our own perceptions of the globalization itself. Now, to begin with, our own understanding about the state and the relationship between state and the individual needs to be reconstituted. The existing perspective has evolved during the globalization period. During the globalization, we were all told that the globalization is inevitable. There is no other alternative for the mankind except globalization. And therefore, globalization was thrust on all of us as if there is no other perspective available, as if there is no other alternative. Now then, in that particular context, everyone began to argue that state itself creates condition for the development of a private sector, for the development of the industry. And that private sector and that industry would now take up the responsibility of bringing about economic development. It in itself would take up the responsibility of providing employment, looking after the welfare of the society. So the state has completely redefined its role. Now, in the present context, people began to ask whether that in itself is sufficient. And I don't think so. That role is now any longer suits in the present circumstances. Right from the industrialist to the economist, everyone says that the state has to take a more proactive role in providing the health, education, as well as some kind of a relief to the unemployed workers. It is they who must now take up the responsibility to generate incomes to the poorer families so that they can buy things and so that market will pick up. For the first time after 1930s, we begin to see people talking about active role of the state both in the economy and in the social life. That active role is what is everyone is visualizing. For example, a lot of people have lost their job and traveled across the country, walked on foot in order to reach their home. Now, what will the state do for them? All of us in Hyderabad are now worried that we really do not know where the testing can be done and who will give us the treatment for COVID. We want the state to take a proactive role, and everyone believes that the private hospitals are not good at dealing with the epidemics and the state must take a more proactive role. Its investment in public health should increase. And similar views are expressed with regard to the public education. People say that online education perhaps helps certain students, but there are many students for whom online education itself is not sufficient. So how the state must now play an active role, everyone says, and must evolve a framework in the context of COVID to manage the education sector. So this is a new thinking that is emerging. In essence, I am arguing that our understanding of welfare policies, our understanding of the public policies needs to be redefined. During the liberalization period, it was viewed that the state would create what they call social capital, which means poorer sections of the society must acquire social capital. What is social capital? If you all stay together, stick together, work together in communities, you can have a better bargaining power in the market, and that helps you win over in the liberalization context. So the basic responsibility of the state was to create this social capital. Now people think that is not sufficient. You must provide cash income to those who have lost their jobs. You must provide food for all those who have lost their employment. And people began to argue that state must play a more proactive role in health as well as in education sector. So new thinking is now required. I'm not saying we need to reinvent everything. These debates have started almost around the period when globalization was initiated. Between philosophers like Amartya Sen, who questioned the earlier thinking about public policy and began to argue that we must have a new understanding about the economic policies itself. So those ideas needs to be reworked in the present context. And Amartya Sen says that the responsibility of the state is to evolve policies that increase the capability of the people, that allow people to lead a more happier life, that help people to lead, express their own creativity without any kind of a suppression in social life. So this is what people like Amartya Sen wanted the state to do. And we think now the time has come that the state and the relationship between state and individual has to be reworked. The second important issue that comes to the fore is the relationship between individual and the collective. Now all of us are asked to stay indoors. Even now we stay indoors. Does it mean we are more free than before?
Daddy.
This question is something that we need to ask again and again. See, the state is something, that we are all as a part of a collective. Maybe we were less free. Maybe, isolation gives us more freedom. But even a liberal doesn't agree with it. Even a liberal would say, we are free only in society, not outside society. Robinson Crusoe is not a free man. He is free provided he has a society to live in. So the society is the crucible in which we live. We learn to enjoy our freedom. We learn to with the help of the others, exercise our freedom. So that is what we really require. But then there were people who would say, like Hegel, who would say, it is the collective which is more important. Therefore, submit yourself to the nation state. Rousseau was trying to balance the two. How do you balance the two? And there were people who would argue that these rights are fundamental, and without sacrificing these freedoms, now you must think of the collective. So now today that question comes to the fore, that collective is important. All of us have asked the maid servants not to come, but suddenly we realize we can't do without them. And after a month or so, everyone started inviting them for work. And slowly, particularly those who are old and infirm, they have no other option but to invite another person to help them. So slowly our perceptions change. We need this collectivity. But then this collectivity is now getting redefined. See, the big bazaar is disappearing. And our own traditional good old, the street corner kirana shop is now coming back to life. Now all of us depend on them. All of us depend upon the vegetable seller who comes to the doorstep. So new relations are now being worked out. How we work out those new relations, how we work out the new community life is something that is very, very important. And where there is no hatred towards the fellow human beings. And that is something we need to think. Now, the third important aspect on which some fresh thinking is required is the concept of globalization. Everyone argued that it is inevitable. Globalization is the only way out in the present world. That is the only future to all of us. But suddenly, after 2008, our thinking began to change. America was the first country to kind of, disown World Trade Organization. It said, I can't do with this kind of a free trade any longer. And they wanted some kind of a restrictions on the trade, and they started imposing restrictions. After the recent Sino-Indian conflict in Galwan Valley, even in India started thinking about self-reliance. Until then, they believed, why do you have to produce everything? It's available in global market. We can easily import it. But today, we don't think along the same lines. We began to argue, why not we produce indigenous? Why not we produce items that are suitable to our culture? Why not we eat our own local available foods rather than importing? So our thinking began to change. Now, therefore, people are arguing that we can't leave everything to the world at large. The Brexit is another example. People are now retreating. So retreating, even America begins to think in terms of imposing restrictions on labor inflows, migrant inflows. So every state is thinking along those lines, which eventually results in, again, getting back to the nation state, getting back to the national protection of national markets. Now, if that is the kind of a new thinking that emerges, maybe, globalization itself gets redefined. And in what form, what agencies would work for the redefinition, and what would be the role of, the new global agencies in the changing context. I think, that is going to be a major issue for discussion. In one word, the values, the institutions that are known to us, now they're being uprooted. Now we have to now rework, though, too close to the event, therefore we are not able to see many of the implications very clearly at this point of time. But quite a number of them are evident to us at this point of time. And we must now, at this point of time, as academics, there is a greater responsibility. We can't simply be the kind of teaching institutions any longer. Though national education prefers that some institutions must be only a teaching institution, but we can't afford to do that. The time has come that we should take up serious work on some of these issues. Now, in the political science, I feel we are passing through challenging times. There are many challenges that we are facing. How do we define the kind of new public policies? How do we, for example, work in the present context? There are writers who are saying our understanding of globalization itself is faulty. It needs to be redefined. And there are writers who say that no longer the world is respecting it. So there is a need to redefine even the globalization process. So many of these aspects require a serious study, serious research. New ideas are emerging. New ideas are emerging. New institutions are slowly emerging. And the kind of collective empathy that people have shown towards the fellow human being is something that needs to be admired. Perhaps from that sense of concern for the fellow human being, we would give shape to our ideas in the coming days. That kind of an empathy is perhaps what should be the basis for our understanding and our action on issues that affect all of us, particularly in the political realm. That should be the basis. Maybe our political activity itself has to completely change. Today, it's some kind of a mechanical process in which people handle elections by evoking the emotions. That perhaps is no longer possible, and new political processes may also have to be engendered in this particular context. What would be the shape of that? I can't immediately visualize, but there is that urgency is now being felt everywhere. I think these are some of the questions that I want to raise using this forum, and I thank the forum for sharing my concerns. When you asked me, I started thinking about it because these are something that we don't get in any question textbooks. We have to think and from our own experiences, and these are some of the things I thought I would share with all of you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, sir, for those wonderful insights. In fact, you ended on a note that talked about not being just mechanical in terms of political processes. So taking emotions forward, I think we'll hand over the session to Akram Feroz. Akram, he is representing, Mr. Akram Feroz is representing the discipline of arts. So over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. I hope I'm just audible enough.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. It's a huge privilege to just interact with digitally in these times and the conditions that we live in. And as if arts and humanities was not dooming before, this pandemic has made it much worse. But that also brings up very important questions that all our panelists actually raised. That like Professor Aparna Sen was mentioning us about the history to be preserved. And that's where the questions of arts and humanities comes into it. How do you actually present in different ways? We remember the tragedies of Second World Wars, the First World Wars. And if we try and imagine them, it is that imageries which has remained with us. And the imageries of the movies, the imageries of the artworks that we have seen. And that is what makes us very sensitive when we talk about a world war. And historically, we had pandemics, but we do not have a memory of it. And that is where, how we have completely lost track of keeping arts and humanities as a very important priorities. Both arts and humanities have been systematically oppressed. I mean, with policies and institutionals and as in economic field. I mean, we remain to be the most downtrodden economic circle of people, the last priority of the economic circle, if you look into it, both arts and humanities. And humanities is also very important. Now, such a pandemic, how much human resource do we have to tackle a situation like this? I doubt we have enough trained human resources to actually work with different sections of society that has been impacted. I guess the whole section of society has been impacted. Might be some of us who are privileged enough to speak digitally might have been impacted a little lesser, but the rest of the society has been impacted with it. It is, it's a huge challenging time for as an artist to live in, but it's a huge important time to make history available for people around, for the generations which are going to come forward. How do we make sure that it is very important we leave these situations not in the forms of the historic books only, but as a part of emotions of what has happened to the migrant laborers, what has happened to different people who have lost jobs, what has happened to people who have lost life in the hospitals, not finding opportunities of the Medicaid, which is so much important. Now, these are the things that keeps us alive. This is what makes us to think differently. Without this, it is very hard and challenging to start thinking very differently of viable options, what we have been living in the historically in the last 100 years. And in that situation, it becomes much more an important role of universities and colleges. I think it's time that university and colleges stand up and say that, yes, engineering is important. Yes, doctorate is important. And I think the engineering is important. The simple reason is that even in this time, I'm able to speak to you guys through this. And this is what it has done. But so is uh, the arts and humanities is important. Every institution needs to figure out a way that they promote it in the same way. They do not treat them as the secondary back options of the students who could not do well into a certain examination, and that is why you take this up. No, this needs to be, an honor has to be brought into these sections, and that is so much required. And sad part is that nationally, when we look, the policies, the educational policies that is just coming around, we haven't traditionally cut down of budgets in humanities and arts, as if they don't matter. It is unfortunate that we live, because I think arts, I think most of them people think that it's just because of either it is like an high entertaining film industry or the glamour industry, or either the most dissenting form of expression which exists. Sadly, I think it is why arts is important. It actually ranges from the most dissenting voices to the most the glamorous world, and there's a huge mid part, the artisans who live day by day. A film industry is not about just the stars which lives in front, or the directors which produce, and there's a lifespan, there's a whole post-production crew, there is pre-production crew which survives, which is day to day, who has lost their whole jobs together altogether. All of this needs to figure out a solution, and I think it is impossible without universities taking up this challenge, because I do not see political forces try and take up this challenge, because they see arts as certainly as a thing that they would challenge these guys in the position of power. And the universities remain to be in that position to have that interaction with the families, with the students, to bring it. We live in that country where it is seen as a huge taboo. I don't know why, but that is how it is. I have grown up to be into a theater field, uh, and it had been an extremely challenging just to break through. I've been a student, studying in genetics background and then coming into arts. It has been a challenge altogether and seen as like, okay, he can't do anything. That is why he has taken it up. No, it wasn't that. I could do something else. That is where it was. And looking up forward, that what does artists now in the present situations can do? I mean, we do not have. I mean, I can just entertain sitting down in my room now. Having lost that opportunity, forgot about entertaining or even telling what I want to tell as an artist. It's really hard. I mean, we lost live interactions with everyone. I think this is a time where collaborations become so important digitally, where artists come together. I think there is already a talk of in Hyderabad city of forming an kind of different independent art groups coming together and trying to hold sessions online, trying to figure out their way of expressions to try and find out. And these expressions mostly on the present circumstances, highlighting and presenting, how people are actually living in, what is it, to live in these times, which is so important around. And for students, no matter what stream that you're studying, engineering, doctorate, I think it is the best time for you to actually hone something what you have not done traditionally at your home. Get back to express yourself. Try and figure out, methods of expressing yourself. Try and figure out, and I think there are online sessions which makes it much easily available. Initially, which was much difficult. So students needs to figure out, if you were having thought of a little bit of, I kind of paint or I kind of sing. It's time that you invest in, because it not only helps you into your professional career going forward in whatever stream that you're studying, but it's so much important to keep yourself psychologically better in these times. It makes a huge difference to who you are just in your day-to-day life. Arts is part of a discipline that one has to grow in, and it's pretty hard. And in case of bringing in this pandemic situation, I think the government needs to step up, the universities needs to step up, try and reach out to already existing uh, artists, try and figure out how do we reach out to people who are in distress in different ways. If there is something that could bring, even in the most toughest situation that we live in, a smile or a joy or a question or a thought, it has to be arts and artists together onto it. And or else I think both artists and arts, if this pandemic goes on with the same policies and the same philosophy of development thought process that what we had, I think we're born to do. We really need to start questioning and changing the thought process. That's significantly very, very important. Now, the last point that I would like to add is that if you have ever been in any form of artists, reach out to different artists, start collaborating, figure out solutions that, there is a huge stream of digital world which is taking over. Thankfully, I'm coming from a theater background, we're trying to figure out how do we go digital in the forms of Netflix, Amazons, or in Hotstars, or different kinds of forums that is possible. That is a small little glimmer of hope in the times that we live in. But this is again remains to be very privileged, but that's the only option. I still do not know what is the conditions of theater groups living in the smaller towns. What is the conditions of artisans living in the smaller towns? I do not see an options of survivability so far until unless there is a dramatic interventions that can happen and a systematic change that can bring into this whole kind of thought process. I think I'll keep myself short and precise. Thank you, ma'am. It's over to you, Mighty ma'am. Can you guys hear me?
Thank you, Feroz.
Yeah,
thank you for that wonderful take from the perspective of art. Now we'll have the forum open for questions. We have a couple of questions there in the chat box. So question probably to Professor Kodandram sir. Will the greater role of the state in the present crisis lead to a totalitarian state? This is a post from Professor Vijay Kumar. So over to Kodandram sir.
Yeah, there are 3-4 questions that I will answer all of them together if you permit.
Sure, sir. Please.
Yeah. I agree, that we need to be very careful when we entrust the state with more responsibilities. But let me again reiterate that what we are asking for is not the same old welfare state. In the earlier system of welfare state, the state was kind of, trusted, and everyone believed that the state would be able to deliver the goods, and therefore they've vested them with a lot of powers. And today, no longer, we prefer that kind of a welfare state. It would be very interesting, to take a look at Ambedkar or to read Gandhi or, for example, Amartya Sen. You get new insights. They believe that public policies meant for poorer people cannot be worked out without their involvement and without consulting them. So the consultation is now required. Consultation is very important. And therefore, the new welfare state that we are visualizing would be of a different kind, where there would be mechanisms for greater consultation, greater involvement in the policy making process. It requires that new agencies have to be invented. So we would definitely not go for the earlier forms. We have to invent newer forms. And it doesn't mean, the liberalization has given a lot of freedom to the people. In the name of helping the private sector, lot of resources were transferred, much against the constitutional norms, to the private sector. Lands in the very important agricultural areas, they were transferred to the industrial sector. For example, our policies towards the sand mining policies, they're all mainly weighing in favor of the contractors rather than the local users. So all these needs to be reworked in the context of the, reinventing the state again, reinventing the relationship between the state and the individual. Those values needs to be taken into consideration. What we are asking for is a greater participation. While Gandhi preferred it through a Gram Swaraj, Ambedkar preferred it through greater involvement of the ordinary citizens of this country, the oppressed communities. Amartya Sen would again and again argue that economic development cannot be visualized without democracy and without rights. So those rights are not an end in itself, but those rights are instrument for participatory development. So some of these concepts give us a framework to understand and rework on the concept of the welfare state. And then, the question is, how can common people enforce change on politicians? That is where the political process needs to be reworked. Until 1994, till the advent of the globalization, political process was of a different kind in India. If you take a look at it, in India, politics from 1947 to 70s roughly, they were of a particular kind, where a few influential individuals in the village, in the towns, they controlled politics. And the political parties tried to mediate through them. That's the kind of a structure they were relying upon. That's one of the reasons why Nehru was not willing to introduce land reforms. But subsequently, after 1970s, after the land reforms, the structure completely changes. What we see is a direct involvement of people. Often in Telangana, I hear people while traveling in buses, I heard them on a number of occasions that for ordinary people, politics became possible only after the 1970s. Prior to that, they were not involved in politics. But what happened after 94 is something that is very significant. What happens is after 94, they depend on emotions, they depend on money, they depend on media in order to manage elections. Elections has become some kind of a management trick in which you take the help of psephologists. And that's one of the reasons why a large number of them have become so popular in Indian politics now. Now we need to do away with that. What is required is a kind of a serious debate on public issues in the course of the elections. That's not happening at the present, in the present situation. We need to bring back people. We need to take up issues for discussions. I kind of lot of experiences that personal experiences to show that, this is the only method in which we can succeed. For example, if we don't have a better health facilities, let us all ask for it. The moment we begin to ask for it, and it becomes popular in our consciousness, and that automatically reflects in politics. So those ideas, then they become material force and compels the politicians to completely change their attitude, completely change their own thinking. So there is, a lot of discussion is quite possible, and I can't take away the other side time. I would confine to that at this point of time. Then who takes up the responsibility for sudden declaration of the lockdown? Definitely the government has to take the responsibility. They have declared, when the pandemic was spreading from one continent to the other, governments both at the state and center were completely indifferent, and suddenly they imposed lockdown. And that has created a major crisis for the poorer section. Now imagine a person from Uttar Pradesh working in Hyderabad. Now he's worried about his children more than his food, more than his employment. He's worried about his family. He wants to go back and stay with them in this crisis situation, and they had no opportunity. People were prevented from moving out of the cities, so they all had to walk along the railway track, and some of them died on the way. We know all those incidents, so I would not repeat that. But definitely the government has to take up that responsibility. And when the certain amount of restrictions are required, they have not done it properly. The lockdown period has to be properly utilized in order to create the infrastructure for containing COVID, containing coronavirus. They have not done that properly. And today they're more interested in promoting businesses. Little do they recognize that unless and until the COVID situation is handled. It is, I mean, the coronavirus is completely prevented. The COVID is eliminated. The economic processes will not come back to life. Matthew George will be able to explain it better. But this is a situation where it is not lockdown or the absence of it which matters. What matters is better health situation. Unless and until those conditions improve, economy is not going to revive at all. And this is what the governments don't realize. Yielding to pressure from one sector or the other, they're preparing the lockdown policies. Little do they take into consideration the concerns of the people. And that is what really bothers all of us. And we must say that when you take a decision, you must also take people into consideration. Everyone wants to go back to work, but how can you go back to work when there is so much, the health, the whole conditions are not good and favorable for employment. This is what the government is often ignoring. So improving the health facilities is what the government should focus on. They're not able to do it. Every paisa should be spent on the health hospitals, and every effort should be made to eradicate this virus. That should be the priority, without which there cannot be an economic improvement. The next important thing is to give the necessary support to the poor people so that they can buy whatever is essential for their own life, for their own survival. And in the process, they can also kickstart the economy. I think, these are the things that the state is expected to do at this point of time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Probably we'll take a few more questions. This question is to Professor Matthew George. It's from Sriram Prayaga. She's talking about the relocation of people, especially in terms of work culture. Won't this new working ethic increase the rage and the determination in the youth, especially of those working from homes? Probably she's talking about how people working from homes, from their comfort zones, would that really have a great cultural impact?
Thank you for the question. There are two aspects. I think one is we need to look at the larger context. The larger context is that there is so much of uncertainty about jobs in the first place. So while people are working from home, even the ones working from home, many of them are not sure what is going to be the case with their job, maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and so on. So even the ones working from home are not really working now, relax and say, okay, I get to work from home, so I get to do it my way. So this is the first aspect, that because there is a larger uncertainty that is prevailing there, and people are worked up, So in fact, my own experience is that ever since people started working from home, actually most of them are working longer hours, not fewer hours. And that is to do with various things. You see, in the workplace, everything is arranged, ready for work. So you come, get it done and go back. But when you're working from home, things are not really set for working from home. And so you need to make arrangements. And today with kids, if they have school and online class and all that, then you need to share laptops, resources. You can't even work from the room in which they are learning or what. So it's a far more complicated. So I'm less worried about the culture aspect, because this is, we human beings will evolve. I mean, you change the circumstances, people will adapt to the new circumstance. I'm less worried about that. I am more worried about what is the consequence. See, there are some of us, like Professor Kodandara rightly said, there are some of us who can work from home. There are people who cannot work from home. And for some people, at least, their work is connected to the physical space, and usually the poorer ones. And if you prevent them from reaching that physical space, and if that is not accessible, you're actually leaving them out. So I am more worried about that part than people, the culture being affected. But there is one aspect of the culture that I would want to talk about. That is about what I call a serendipity. You see, especially in fields where creativity is required, the what we call as the coffee corner conversations that happen when people meet each other, bump into each other in a campus or in a workplace, and usually two different people working on two different things, sharing ideas is sometimes the source of newer, potential collaboration, newer ideas and things like that. It's a very extreme example. Apple headquarters itself is designed as a circle in order to make sure that people meet each other, people bump into each other. The place is designed that way because Apple is a creative organization, and you want more and more ideas to come because by people accidentally. So this is an angle that I'm worried about, in the sense that we probably would stop learning from each other, or share ideas as much as we would. And when we do share, it will be through a medium like what we are now doing, which is not really spontaneous, which is not really natural. So this is one part I'm worried about. I'm not really worried about the culture transformation, because that I think would keep changing. And from what I can see from the companies, because I work with the other side as well, the corporate report that I get are that most companies think their productivity has not dropped, the productivity has actually gone up. So, and now productivity going up might be good news for the companies, not necessarily from the larger workforce perspective. This is, again, something that we need to understand. So this is my take on it. Again, as I said in the beginning, this is an evolving situation. Do I know? No. I mean, maybe in a month or two, we would know better. But at this point, this is how I look at it.
Thank you, sir. I think this is a question for Aparna, ma'am. There are questions she's asking about, can historians authentically record the pandemic for future generation? You talked in terms of learning lessons from history. Now, for the future, what is going to be the lesson that the pandemic or the COVID-19 has taught us? And how do we unlearn certain things? Did we really unlearn from our past? And what are we going to do for the future generations?
As I was listening to many learned expert discourses from Matthew sir and Conrad sir, I just like to say, see, change is inevitable. We have to opt with, or we have to work with the change, because change is the only constant thing in this nature. The only thing is that how come the historians, they can bring it to the limelight and to the limelight of the future generations and to the futuristic society, and then they can come up with certain, or they can suggest some ways how to get benefit out of it. As sir has said that this is a phase of social and economic transition. It's not only the transition, but then it is coming up with some new opportunities as well, right? And some other direction also, that, say, for example, the live classes, they have ended up, but we are working through this virtual class mode, or through virtual mode of conducting symposium or seminars and all. Again, which is something very, very innovative. Still, the people, they need to learn over it. But yes, somewhere or the other, historians will be focusing that this depends on the generation which is existing in a particular time place within a particular time period, that how they need to cope up and how they need to adjust with the existing situations and with the existing resources. Every time to make a hue and cry that we have been deprived of this, we have been deprived of that. Now, this is what the lessons which a historian can teach. Referring many examples from the past, one example Muhammad Akram has also quoted from World War situations. Now, see, when you are making a very normal piece of art, a very beautiful scenery, it is going to make an appeal to everyone in terms of beauty, in terms of appealing that or raising that type of emotions in your mind. But when you look at some miserable condition or some pathetic or somebody who is in miserable condition, that painting, that also evokes certain emotions in you. And that is, again, if it is invoking certain emotions, that will going to make an impact. You know, a lot many people, they just, after reading one story, they get so much involved that they started doing services, or they started coming out for some charities. So that way, historians, they can make the future generations aware of the certain situations, that how a particular disaster can be taken up or can be turned up into an opportunity. Because nowhere the situation will be changing all of a sudden, right? Or with some sort of miracle. No, miracles, they are only there in the literary books. But in the live situation, we need to fight and need to evolve some sort of solutions to our problems. So what I feel that it is the responsibility of historians to quote certain things from the past, then to relate out to the existing situation and complement them with the suggestions which are coming from economists, which are coming from the sociologists, which are coming from the psychologists. That way, I think they can come up with a framework of a new syllabus as well. As I mean, I talked about that change in the syllabus pattern as well, so that the people, they can feel the direct connect. Some sort of empirical studies, some sort of descriptive studies, and some studies through indirect modes, which Akram sir had said that through the mode of humanity, stories, paintings, sculptures, lot many things, they can invoke lot many emotions in you, and then they can make an impact on your mind, and for contribute to society with all those changing norms which you are registering. So what I feel that as a historian, the clear indication or the right indication of each and everything in history books or narrating out what actually happened. As sir also said that there was a decision of lockdown. Was it perfectly fine? So we need to assess it. Over the economic parameters, we need to assess it on the parameter of social perspective, over the perspective of the psychology that the people they are going to have during this lockdown period. You know, small kids, I mean, if you observe, everybody must have been observing this. Small kids, they are so much stressed, and nobody is thinking about one situation again, which is to be brought up. Earlier I was thinking, but then less time was there. So now I'm just, historians, we need to focus on the relevance of technology plus the bad impact of technology as well. Not many people, I mean, it happens with me, so I guess it may be the case with some other people also. Constantly in front of a screen. And science also says that the radiations which are there through this net and internet on all online learning and online modes, they are somewhere or the other harmful. Nobody is pondering over it. So either to come out with some sort of solution to, so that they would not be impacting in a bad manner to our young minds, to our young people, and to elderly as well, that also needs to be taken up into consideration. That means history, a historian can take a note that all the disciplines, they need to be merged and they need to be consulted before forming a syllabus related to this particular area and before coming up to a descriptive idea related to this pandemic situation. I guess the person who has questioned, I'm able to satisfy your query.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Now we have a question, many questions for Mr. Akram Feroz. How can art and artists make an impact for the future generation, especially in terms of addressing the pandemic issue?
I think I think one of the reasons that artists are quite well known is finding that empathy or figuring out what hurts us the most in the society. And it is the time, I think, if the whole society has been going through is an immense pain. As much as we try to live, but there's a huge amount of uncertainty that leaves around. So there's two important processes, which is an action right now and an action for the society going ahead. Right now, it's very important. How do we, get engaged with common resources, common people across platforms? And as we are locked in the homes, we need to find digital ways. That means we are leaving a lot others behind. But having seen the technology impact, as simple as the app which is banned now, TikTok might be, which had given an opportunity for people who would not usually would express in a society. Now it has two impacts of it, good or bad, but there's one major impact was trying to bring an opportunity for people would never express themselves. And that one single technology app could do for so many ways. And they were quite in creative, innovative ways from the rural villages coming on that technology. And it's important that these artists try and reconnect. We need to figure out and use the technology the best way possible in the present time. Um, at present, what it requires is a huge social um, happiness, or finding some relief across, because there is an economic uncertainty, there is an medical uncertainty which is going to live with us for some more time, till the time there is a vaccine might be. And it will make us much more depressive as time goes by, because everything looks pretty gloomy for a lot of people. How do we as artists engage them in the present circumstances is so much important. The other one is, how do we make the governments much more engaged, trying to find out these pains and present it to the government. Look, there is a pain, the pain which you really need to react to it. And this is so much important. Without institutional supports, there is, when I say institutional, that is both the governments or any institutions or organizations, it is very difficult for a lot of state of the society to uplift themselves in these situations. They cannot see and hope of uplifting by themselves. They do not. That's a reality on the grounds, in the villages, in the towns that we live in. And it is very important that pain has to be shown to the relevant authorities. That emotion needs to be expressed out there. And that becomes a very huge responsibility of the artist community to come together. And then preserving history. I think there is no significant way of preserving histories than stories, than paintings, than sculptures, than films. Now, because of the technology, the films, or even the oral storytellings. There is nothing better way of preserving the history and trying to tell. It's very interesting to see how the advertisement, like when I was a kid, the Lifebuoy ad was more about, of the medical kit. It was about washing your hands. That was the prominence of something like an advertisement of Lifebuoy. Now, when we look at any soap advertisements, it's more of the glamour. It's more of the fragrance than actually the medical kit. That's how the transition of the industry happened around. But I think we need to get back. We need to really start seeing as artists and content creators that the significance is health and health and the pain that people are going through. How do we figure out and present this? It's going to be quite a challenge sitting at homes, but figuring out solutions is what artists, it's going to be hard. It's not an easy time for anyone. And artist community is eventually hit by bread and butter also, like anyone else. So I don't know how much the responsibility that they would be able to actually take up, but it is time that artists do step up and take this responsibility.
Thank you, Akram. Taking a question forward, I think we have another question, Akram, for you. Has digitalization of street plays been ventured? And if so, what is the impact on the society?
With theater
different from the local, I mean, the traditional street play and, the digitalization concept? How are these two?
It's a two different scapes. Whenever a theater is digitalized, it doesn't have the same impact as a film or a short film. It's a complete two different mediums. The reason why street plays or theater works, because it connects people directly. It's an emotion which is. But if you have to go into digitalization, then you have to start thinking in the format of short stories, films, because what technicalities that you could use while presenting short films and films is hugely different. There's a completely different level of connections for the audience who are sitting over there. It might not necessarily be a direct emotion or a direct thing which could actually bring a goosebump what it could do in a real stage theater, but it's a complete different. I think not only just a street play, I think it would be, I have always been not in supportive guy of taking place digitalization, because it just takes away every emotion. You cannot digitalize plays. Instead, create a short story of the same thing, create a film of the same thing, which is a complete different challenge altogether. Though now the governments have opened it up to open up now. We've been shooting on a film, but it is quite a challenge. There's so much of restrictions which is required. Do we go out? Do we not? How many do people we engage on to create this? Digitalization might be short stories is a better option than street plays.
Okay, thank you, Akram. There's a question from Keerthi Manikanthan, I guess. She says, how do you foresee, I think this is to Matthew George, sir, how do you foresee this crisis affecting the already existing income inequality in our country? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Keerthi, for that question. It's a very interesting question. So we in the field of economics, we talk in terms of usually short run, medium run, long run, and things like that. So in the short run, I think the answer is pretty straightforward. It is inequality worsening. I mean, so inequality is good because you see, if you look at the incomes that we have, there are broadly two kinds of income. One is active incomes, the other is passive income. So active incomes come from what people earn by giving their labor. The passive incomes are what people earn from rentals and, because they hold stock and therefore a dividend and whatever else that you get, that is passive income. So whenever there's a contraction that happens, immediately the first level of contraction would be the active income. So to that extent, I am saying in the short run, it is pretty clear the inequality will widen because for the poorest of poor, the only source of income is active income. And as the portfolio widens, if the richer you go, you will have some passive source of income as well. And then there comes to a point where some people have only passive income. You get what I'm trying to say. So this is the range. So in the short run, it is pretty clear that the inequality is going to widen. Now, I am interested actually in the next question. Okay, what happens when inequality widens? Because this is an interesting way. Alfred Hirschman had something called, he proposed something called a tunnel. It was called the tunnel hypothesis or the tunnel effect he used to call. So Hirschman's logic was very simple. Imagine that you are stuck in a tunnel. It's a 2-lane tunnel and you can't see the end on both sides. The traffic is jammed on both ends. Okay. Now, you can't see the other end. What is happening? Your lane is blocked. The opposite lane is blocked. There's perfect equality. Everybody is stuck. Okay. That is equality. Now, after a while, you see the other lane moving. When the other lane moves, are you unhappy or are you happy? Initially, you are happy because now there is an inequality, but that inequality is an inequality that creates hope. Now, imagine that the other side now starts moving and it is 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours later, you see the other lane moving, you are stuck. You know what will happen in India especially, right? All the vehicles will take on to the next lane. And then before you realize, both the lanes would be jammed again. So you're back to equality. The point I'm trying to say is with inequality, there is an angle that you need to see. There is a certain level of inequality that inspires or creates hope and aspiration, builds on aspiration. There is an inequality that kills hope. The moment there is a pervasive inequality that kills hope, the basic structure of the society collapses. And there are no two ways about it. And all revolutions have actually begun with that. So their inequality is part of the market system. And let's be clear about that. And you cannot have the market system without inequality. But the question is, what level of inequality? Is the inequality that is existing, is it something which is creating aspirations and is it something which is creating hope? Or is the inequality that is creating hopelessness? It's killing hope. Now, so what I'm trying to say, in the short run, I'm fairly sure that it is going to widen inequality. Up to that, it is pretty clear. What happens in the long run, as I said in my presentation, depends on what we do going forward from here. Ideally, if we all realize the larger threats to the society, and I'm saying, when I say we, including, I hope the ones who are benefiting from the current inequality, if they realize, they would actually agree to income redistribution is what I feel. And Professor Kodandaram was talking about, and taking care of the marginalized, the poor. And today it has come to a point that the only way for you to do it is actually by redistribution. That's a fact. If we don't redistribute, we have to print money. Printing money will result in inflation. Inflation will again affect the poor more than the rich. Again, it works in it. So if you look at it, there comes a point where the only solution to it is redistribution. And that redistribution can happen perhaps only with higher direct taxes. When I say higher direct tax, I'm talking about higher tax for the higher income brackets, probably inheritance tax, wealth tax, and so on. Not very popular ideas currently, and then fund it for ensuring there is universal basic income or maybe better social security and things like that. If that happens, then in the long run, what started today could actually reduce inequality and keep inequality to a level where there is inequality, but it is still inequality that maintains or creates or instills hope, and not an inequality that kills hope. I hope I have answered that.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Ms. Sonia Raju. It's to Professor Kodandram, sir. What should be the role of the government in narrowing the urban-rural digital divide and enabling e-learning for students in the absence of traditional classroom learning? Over to you, sir. Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
That digital divide, that cannot be eradicated so easy. Now, within Hyderabad, there are a number of areas where signals are not very clear. And if you really want to use the internet, you have to invest a lot of money. The monthly expenses are also very high, which is not a very easy thing for many people in this country. I think, everyone has a smartphone, but utilizing the smartphone, they require the necessary digital connections. Those connections are not available. And hence, I feel that those digital classes, people in the rural areas, they're protesting against it. They say, we would be deprived of the teaching facilities. So the problem is overcome with the help of television. Andhra Pradesh government tried it. Kerala government is now implementing it. They are now trying to, certain channels are totally devoted for daily classes. And on those channels, they're playing the lessons. From among the available teachers, the best are selected. And they're asked to teach the students with the help of these television channels. That is working out well. But however, the role of teacher cannot be eliminated. You require a teacher who can mediate between the channel and the student. So that if that role is properly defined, and then obviously this divide can be mitigated to a certain extent. Not totally, at least to a certain extent, we can address this issue. That's the available answer most teachers are able to give us.
Thank you, sir. I think there's another question. Political involvement of bringing change in these trying times since the existence of democracy has been exemplary. To what extent did the political parties in India use their power to bring change? To what extent did the voice of people bring about a change or impact the government?
Again, I would say, you can't club all the parties to and put them on the same pedestal. There are parties which are trying to bring about change. For example, Aam Aadmi Party has been quite successful. In fact, you can say it is a huge success. In a context where people spend a lot of money to win the election, they're not doing it. And they have won the elections merely by virtue of their performance. Similarly, the Bahujan Samaj Party, you may disagree with their ideologies, but then it also has been a huge success. They have been able to mobilize the most marginalized communities of this country and turn them into a political force, which is not a mean thing at all. Then there are other parties like, very small parties, Bharat Party, or exactly I don't remember, but it begins with the word Bharat. That party mobilizes the tribals in Rajasthan. And in the current the crisis in Rajasthan, that party is playing a crucial role. They've decided to support Gehlot, the present chief minister. And that party also, without much support, they used a very unique method. They said it is like going to relatives' houses, their concept. Each one would go to a relative's house, tell them what we need to do in order to bring about political change, and request the other relatives to take part in this. And with their support, he travels to another village. So this is the system that they have evolved. And that system has been very successful. I'm quite impressed with the way they utilize this system. One simple anecdote. There was an occasion when we were holding a meeting in a village and trying to explain why we require a separate state. They were all illiterate women. They were listening to us. We didn't even know whether they would be following us or not. But at one point of time, some political leaders came and tried to disturb the meeting. These women got up and they said, why are you disturbing this meeting? For the first time, people are come to our village to teach us certain things. So if you are willing to teach, change is likely, change is quite possible. This is what we must realize. The ideas are not reaching them. But once an idea reaches them, definitely it becomes a very powerful political force. And I believe in it because there are living examples like Aam Aadmi Party. There are living examples like the Bahujan Samaj Party. They have not won with the help of money. They have built their parties through very hard work. And that is the only example we are left with. It is not so easy. Like people think to succeed, you require money. But we must realize that it is not money which defines everything. There are many occasions where money played a very little role in transforming. When Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, she introduced very radical reforms. All the big capitalists of the country they were quite angry with Indira Gandhi and decided to defeat her. They took part in the elections, and no one could have spent more than Tata, Birla, and the other industrialists. But in spite of their massive investment in electioneering, they've not won even a single seat in the election. They've lost miserably. So there are examples, many examples like that. What is required is sustained political campaign that the socialists have done in the 1950s, the Aam Aadmi Party has done in the modern times. And in between, there are a number of examples that you can quote. What is required is sustained political work. And that sustained political work must rely on other techniques, not simply using money and the media mobilization method. We must overcome those limitations and think of alternatives. And those alternatives have to be popularized. I always think of Plato when we discuss these issues. Plato also takes up this very interesting discussion with his own friends in the Republic. Is all about this dialogue. And Republic, in Plato says, why do we need, what kind of a social order you need, what kind of politicians we need. Then everyone says one who can use the power effectively. And finally, Plato rejects all of them. And he says, which doctor do you prefer? One who can treat well or one who has learned the technique of cheating the others and earn the money? Then everyone said, we need a good doctor who can treat well. So if that is the case, why do you need a politician who can cheat everyone? Why don't you need a politician who can articulate the concerns of the people and work for certain changes in the policies? So that is precisely the question. What Plato asked thousands or hundreds of years ago, I think is still relevant, and the same kind of question we need to ask now. I would conclude by saying it's a very, very difficult job, but you must be prepared to do it. We must be prepared to do it because that's the only way, that's where the future lies. Otherwise, we will all have to suffer. Because, it's our future, we all have to think of methods that are more effective, more efficient, more humane. And that's what we need to work for.
So taking it forward, in terms of health sector, has the pandemic really impacted the government or the governments across the globe in investment, especially when we take the case of India specifically? Are we investing in health sector and research and development?
We are not doing it properly. In the public health investments in public health sector, they're very low. For example, you take Telangana into consideration. It is one of those states which spends the least. And what we require is more and more investment from the government. Now, today we have realized, all the while everyone thought that the government hospitals may not be, they may not be very important. But suddenly we have realized when there is a pandemic, the private hospitals are of no use at all. They play a very little role in such circumstances. What we require is a public institution. So everyone is talking about a public health institute that can provide an immediate treatment, that can immediately, without any kind of an expenditure on the poorer sections of the society, without, where the poorer sections don't have to incur any expenditure. So that is the structure that people are now debating. So they say that why not we invest more money in hospitals? Why not we improve hospitals? Now these issues were taken up for argument before the High Court. This is a very interesting example. All of us must read about it very carefully. When we filed a case, friend Professor Vishweshwar Rao filed a case in High Court. He asked for a series of relief measures, which includes better infrastructure in public institutions, treatment facilities, and then testing facilities in every district, in every government hospital. Then the court wanted the government to respond to this. Public interest litigation is a very unique legal instrument. You don't really, in fact, it is not a battle between two parties. It is in fact an attempt to negotiate a settlement using the court as a dais, as a forum. So the court was trying to get appropriate answers from the government. From April 4th, they went on till May 26th in order to get an appropriate answer from the government. They were persuading, they were pressurizing, they were kind of, chiding the government administration. Finally, when the government has not yielded to their request, they came out with an order. And this order, they clearly defined what they expect the government institutions to do. So this is a kind of a dialogue, that really contributed to a lot of changes in the government policies in Telangana. Today, their bulletin is completely different. They write on the bulletin that the High Court format. Today, they have agreed to create testing and treatment facility in every hospital, in the government hospital in the state, including the primary health center. And today, they are forced to create the necessary infrastructural facilities, provide the PPEs to the doctors. That's what the court has been able to do. So it's when all other institutions fail, you rely on court, and that court can initiate a healthy dialogue. Obviously, it has happened in the case of Telangana High Court, and people were angry with the Supreme Court for not playing a similar role. But wherever the Telangana High Court could initiate that dialogue, and it benefited the citizens. Now that the court, the kind of order that they have issued on May 26th is a document that we all should read, and this document clearly says by putting beds, you can't create a hospital. What you need is a doctor. What you need is the necessary infrastructure. All of them have to be clearly established and put in place if you really want to run a good hospital. So this is a unique method that we could secure certain policy changes. But in doing so, we are also laying down a principle, what the state is expected to do in future. And based on that, we need to work further and think in terms of a public policy where the health becomes a concern of the government. So this is, the way we can move forward. And precisely this is what people, many philosophers have argued, that you need to argue, open a dialogue consistently, persistently pursue it. That is the only method. There cannot be shortcuts in order to bring about a change. But these are the small efforts where you can see the seeds of the future. That's what I'm trying to argue. The way they have taken up the case of migrant labor. And, the way they pleaded for relief measures. On every single aspect, the court took a serious interest, and then they opened a dialogue. When the government refused, they finally issued an order. When government did not implement, they exerted a lot of pressure on the government. And finally, the government has to yield. They had to change their position so that, when they refused, Chief Secretary was asked to come to the court. So that's the kind of a pressure court has put. Very careful. They were not interested in kind of misusing their authority. They were not interested in imposing their views on the government, but they were trying to persuade the government, open a discussion with the government, and eventually the orders were coming. And those orders, and I would say from the current perspective, they're very simple kind of victories as far as people are concerned. But then there are very significant implications for the long-term health policy, long-term welfare policies. This is precisely, what we are trying to argue, what we are trying to, and that's where lies the seeds of a new welfare state that we are envisioning.
Thank you very much, sir. In fact, I thank all the panelists. We've had a wonderful discussion. In fact, very thought-provoking and very insightful. I think the clock has struck 4, so it's time for us to call it a day. In fact, it's been a very, very learning experience. I'm sure it should have been for all the participants as well. This would have been perhaps just the surface of the entire effort of bringing about a change, rather, or just an attempt or an iota in the whole process. But I'm sure that we will take this forward to probably to some extent take it forward so that, there would be some kind of initiatives taken in the near future. So thank you very much, Aparna ma'am. You have touched upon, history. In fact, you talked about the various, you talked about the interconnectedness of the various disciplines in terms of, you also mentioned how much we have been learning about the pandemics of the past and what is to be done for the future generations or the future to come. And Matthew George, sir, you were simply amazing, brilliant talk in terms of touching upon relocation of people in terms of from the more productive to the less productive, in terms of, then you spoke about reaction to the three-tiered decisions that the government has been taken, the central, the state, and the local. And then you talked about the economy surge in different areas. You talked about the slump of economies in different areas. You talked about economies, how they've affected culture, in fact. So, and then you also ended up your talk in a very, very hopeful, on a very hopeful note. In fact, we were thinking that, economy is something, the biggest picture now that appears to be the biggest challenge to confront. In fact, you left a very hopeful note. Thank you so much, sir. And Professor Kodandram, sir, you were amazing. In fact, you talked about the need to redefine public policies. You talked about social inequalities, referring to Rousseau's theory, and then you also touched upon the societal importance of societal living, and then dissolving those boundaries or barriers in terms of facing the pandemic. Thank you so much, sir. Akram, you were simply amazing in terms of, you talked about how important art or art form is, especially theater. Theater can be so very impactful when we say expression, when we say about showing our emotions or expressing ourselves. Theater can be a wonderful medium of expression, not just theater. In fact, all art forms can be a way to actually outburst our emotions, are probably the positive and the negative as well. So thank you one and all. So I think we will take it forward to the next level in terms of writing a report and presenting it to the higher authorities. Thank you one and all, sir. So tomorrow tomorrow we will be joining for the day 2, session 3, which would begin at 10 o'clock. Am I correct, Sudha ma'am? Yeah, tomorrow we begin our session at 10 o'clock. So I invite all of you who have been part of the discussion to join us tomorrow also. We have 2 sessions tomorrow, morning and afternoon. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Seminar without the customary tea. Thank you.
It's all virtual.
Okay. Wonderful seminar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we'll give virtual claps to all the speakers, madam.
Yes. We can say that.
And probably my apologies to some of those people who I don't think we would have answered everyone, but I tried to sum up most of the questions, 2 or 3 questions into one. So I'm sure you would agree to that. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Over to Sudharani, madam.
Is Keerthi there? Shall we close?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Maitri. I am there.
Yeah, shall we close it, ma'am?
Yeah, please close it. We will meet tomorrow at 10.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all.